Hello, I'm Jennifer Beller, the Artistic Director of the Nextet New Music Series at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and welcome to our podcast episode titled Keys to the Kitchen with Katie Leung, Deadpanned Pound Cake Remix. Katie is a collaborative pianist and chamber musician who not only performs around the country, but is also a regular performer on our Nextet concert series. She has collaborated with renowned soloists and orchestral players, and at UNLV, she is the miracle worker who guides students through their recitals and performances without a hitch. Known to her colleagues for her reliable and sensitive playing, she also happens to be an avid lover of baked goods. Welcome, Katie.
Hello, Nextet team.
So, Katie, what are we making today?
Today, we are making a pound cake, but with finesse. 'Cause I don't know about you, but I sure could use some more finesse in my life.
So, Katie, why did you decide to make pound cake?
Well, so in doing some research for this episode, I discovered that in 1956, a woman named Georgia Gilmore was a cook at the National Lunch Company in Montgomery, Alabama. And she was fired from her job for participating in the Montgomery bus boycott. So she then started the Club from Nowhere, which held bake sales to raise money to fund the boycott. And pound cake would have been one of the items that she sold in order to raise up to $200 a week. Because this is a new music podcast, I've selected some pieces for a playlist to accompany this episode. So I've chosen these pieces because in different ways they examine a sense of belonging. So a sense of belonging as a member of society, or a sense of belonging in classical music, on the concert stage, a sense of belonging if your music doesn't pull from the European classical tradition. Now we are going to go into the mixer with some egg whites. Can you see these?
Ooh.
They're kind of falling in the bowl. Okay, well, imagine.
Tip more. There we go. Perfect.
So, egg whites and sugar. Okay, remember what this looks like, because something amazing is going to happen. So while I'm in the mixer, because it's super loud, we are going to take a commercial break. And you are going to listen to some music. And the first piece we are going to hear is a movement from Daniel Bernard Roumain's String Quartet No. 5, Rosa Parks. This movement is called Clap Your Hands. And each one of Roumain's string quartets is named after an iconic figure from the civil rights movement. See you soon! now. Isn't science amazing?
Ooh.
Super amazing. Those look magnificent, Katie. I have a question for you.
Mhm.
So, what did you do during lockdown?
I did not learn a new language. I did not discover the meaning of life. But I finally had time to really like sit down and eat, 3 meals a day and, take time to enjoy my food and not have to work or practice at the same time. And I think that's something that we should really consider making a priority moving forward. Um, I think, well, I wonder why, it's become socially acceptable to skip meals or to work while eating. Because it's really not good for you. And I think we need to stop glorifying being really busy. I enjoyed my food and I finally had time to bake because I actually don't have a lot of uh, time to bake during the school year, especially. So it was really nice to, you know, I guess it wasn't that nice to be at home all day, but it was nice to have time to bake. And so I tried a lot of new things that I hadn't made before, including the infamous Swiss roll.
One of my personal favorites. You made it for my birthday.
Oh, that's right, the German chocolate cupcake.
Which took like 12 bowls to make, right?
Pretty much.
Worth it. They tasted amazing.
So, Katie, speaking of all the stuff you baked, student composer and Nextet team member Brittany Benton has a question. Do you have a favorite thing to bake?
Favorite thing to bake? Not really. I actually really like trying new recipes. Um, so trying new things because I wouldn't call myself an expert baker, and I would say that at this point I'm still working my way through the repertoire, so to speak.
Speaking of repertoire and that connection between food and music, what is that connection between food and music for you?
Well, I really like good food and I really like good music. Um, I think for me, it's not that one informs the other necessarily. Perhaps my attention to detail really benefits me in both fields, in performing and also in cooking and baking. Um, but yeah, I don't do one because of the other. I just like both.
You're talking about that attention to detail. Are you telling me that you don't just throw ingredients all together and just hope that it matches up? You like measure everything very precisely?
Most ingredients. Um, some some things can be, willy nilly, but I did measure these ingredients on a scale. So,
Props. It's good stuff. All right, I have another question. So, what have your experiences been like working with students in a remote collaborative setting?
it's not ideal, obviously. Um,
Right, of course.
'Cause, my specialty is collaboration with people in the same room. Um, and people have been talking a lot about all the different programs and software that's out there in order to enable like real-time remote collaboration, but I found that they require a lot of resources from the student. Like they need to have a really good internet connection and Ethernet connection, a microphone and headphones, and I just don't think it's realistic to request that from students, who weren't anticipating that. And I mean, students are zooming in on their phones and their tablets and from like literally every room in the house, like kitchens, bedrooms, dining rooms, bathrooms. And then, there's like the normal offices and practice rooms, but also like I've seen, public school classrooms as well. So everyone's just trying to make it work. Um, The one thing that I have been requiring for students giving recitals is, what is it? It's, Zoom sessions before we meet in person. So we've been going over the score and discussing things that they really need to be considering before they show up to rehearsal. And so my hope with that is that students will realize the kind of preparation that they need to be doing before rehearsal in order to make an in-person rehearsal really efficient. But we'll see.
So do you think that this is something that you might continue doing when we get past the point of not being able to rehearse with each other? You might consider this in the future as a first step working with students before actually working in the same room?
The Zoom session, yes, because I'm realizing also how much I do not need to play for these sessions. Because I mean, most people know that I end up playing a lot of hours, really long hours, which is really not great for anyone, but I'm realizing that a lot of it doesn't require me to play, maybe demonstrate a little bit, but a lot of it is just discussing what we see and or should be hearing in the score.
I get to ask you another question. What are your opinions, Katie, about putting the piano at full stick or half stick in a collaborative setting?
We are using full sticks of butter here, and you should be using the full stick on the piano. Here's why. When you put the piano on the short stick, it doesn't actually make the piano softer in terms of decibels. What does happen is that you lose clarity and color and articulation and all of those things that pianists spend a lot of time working on. So when you ask a pianist to put the piano at half stick, first of all, you're telling someone else how to set up their own instrument. And second of all, you're really just like negating all these things that we've spent time practicing. And fun fact, well, not so fun. When the piano is on the short stick, pianists tend to play louder because of that loss of clarity. So, yeah, full stick all the way. All right, we are gonna go back in the mixer for commercial break number 2. And the next piece you'll hear is Tania León's piece called Indígena, which means indigenous in Spanish. And Tania León was born in Cuba, but moved to the United States in 1967 as part of a resettlement program for Cubans. And she wasn't able to return back to Cuba until 1979. So this piece was written in 1991, and it evokes sounds of the neighborhood in Cuba where she grew up. But to me, it also makes us think about, where we belong, or, do we only belong in one place, even though we all have different influences from our pasts. So I will see you in a few.
So, Katie, I know you said that this can be made by hand. What are some tips you have if somebody doesn't have a mixer at home?
Well, um, if you're beating eggs, make sure they're at room temperature because they're especially hard to beat if they're cold. Um, Another thing is if you're beating egg whites, make sure your bowl and your whisk are perfectly clean because any little bits of like fat or oil or soap left over in the bowl or on the whisk will make it really hard for the egg whites to whip up. Another tip is reschedule arm day at the gym. And last tip is that if you play an instrument that requires the use of your hands or arms, make sure you practice before you bake. And as a reminder, you only need to practice on the days you eat.
Can you talk about some of your experiences working with living composers and how is that related to interpreting recipes?
Well, certain composers are very exacting and they want you to play exactly what's on the page. Um, and other composers are more flexible and they want you to put your own spin on their music. And I find that that's sort of the same concept with certain recipes. So certain recipes are more forgiving of, not really measuring and just throwing the ingredients together. And some recipes really require like certain exact ratios in order for them to turn out properly. And so with enough knowledge and experience, you sort of, with composers and with baking, you realize which composers or which recipes are more open to your own interpretation and which ones must really be precise.
So, we actually have another question by student composer Brittany Benton. Her question is this: how do you make time to bake between your practicing and performing?
I'm not sure that I really have found the right balance. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I don't have that much time to bake during the school year. And especially for me, baking isn't a spur of the moment thing. I don't always have the ingredients at home. And then there's like the prep time because a lot of recipes require that your ingredients be brought to room temperature, like eggs and butter. And then, there's the mixing time, baking time, the cooling time, and so yeah, you just need to make sure you have enough time. All right, going into the loaf pan. So now that the batter's in the pan, I'm just smoothing it out a little bit. And we want to be gentle because we whipped up these egg whites and we don't want them to deflate too much. Okay. Now, at this point, you can go into the oven like this, or you can add some fruit on top.
Are you adding fruit?
I am adding fruit.
What are you adding?
I have sliced up a Granny Smith apple, and I'm
Nice.
going to layer the apple slices on top. And for this next commercial break, we are going to be hearing an excerpt from Nkeiru Okoye's opera, Harriet, Tubman, which is a two-act opera which tells the story of one of the iconic figures of the Underground Railroad. And this aria is called I Am Harriet Tubman, Free Woman. While we wait for this pound cake to bake, let's answer some more questions.
Okay, I'll start. So, Katie, how do you manage learning and performing so much repertoire when you have multiple concerts or performances in a week?
Well, I do practice a lot, um, but it's also a lot of planning and scheduling. So I make a practice schedule for myself based on what's coming up. Um, And so a lot of what I play is standard repertoire. And so over the years, I've learned a lot of it. But keep in mind that I do have to be able to play with every classical instrument and voice. So obviously, one person can't know everything. Um, but so I try to be as efficient as possible when practicing. I think I could be more efficient, but it's definitely a goal to not just spend time playing through things over and over again. And another thing, at least for me as a collaborative pianist, that I have to consider when I practice is not just preparing my own part, but also learning all of the other parts that I'm about to play with, because it really does influence, what you're doing. And so I have to prepare, plan for to wait when a one player or a singer needs to take a breath, or a string player has a really big shift. And while I think it's really important to have a clear idea and conception of a piece before I go into rehearsal, I also want to be open to the other person or other people's ideas. And so for me, that's what music making is really about. It's really being at a place of preparation where you are free to respond to what the other person has done in real time. And I think for me, that's something that's been missing in this pandemic, with all these virtual collaborations and everyone just recording their own part. You really can't do any of that, like real time responding. And so I hope that when we can really make music together in person again, that we really take advantage of that and really appreciate that.
So, Katie, how was the experience during lockdown for you?
Well, it felt like the world, came to a sudden halt. Everything was canceled. We couldn't go anywhere. Nothing was really happening. And for me, what I struggled with the most was the sense of loss of identity as a performer because every performance was canceled and every performance had, I don't have a future performance in sight right now. And this is the first time since I started playing the piano that I haven't had a performance in sight. Like, even, when you start, you have that end of the year recital to work towards. And so for the past, over 20 years, there's always been a performance in sight, and now there's nothing. So I think for me, it was really coming to terms with, um, thinking about not having a performance, but still being a musician.
So there are a few things I would love to have changed when we can have concerts or live concerts again. And one of the things, how amazing would it be if the next Nextet concert wouldn't just be a reception at the end where we have the food and the drinks and we bring everyone together at the very end? How cool would it be if we were able to actually do all of that at the same time and eat and drink while enjoying new music, and there was no divide between that? I mean, don't you wish we could eat and drink wine at the same time as listening to new music?
Um, I've been thinking about this a lot, and yes and no. I think pairing, something really accessible like eating dinner with new music is a really good gateway for people who aren't, habitual concert goers. But at the same time, like, I wonder how much you can really listen if you're also eating, or how much you can also enjoy your food if you're also trying to listen to music at the same time. But I think it is a really good idea to make a concert experience less intimidating for people who aren't used to classical music concerts, or even who don't listen to new music on a regular basis.
So, what would be your ideal concert going experience?
Well, I think, especially as classical musicians, we need to reevaluate the entire concert experience. And it's not just, the concert doesn't begin when the house lights go down. It really begins when you walk in the door of the building. And especially at UNLV, I mean, like, how many times have you walked in and there's no signage, no posters, and you're like, is there a concert tonight? Maybe. And so think about how confusing that must be for someone who's not a musician, someone who's not a UNLV student or faculty member. And I mean, those are the community is are the community members are people we should be really trying to, attract to our concerts. And so I think just having the entire experience from walking in the door and being made to feel welcome there, and not being made to feel like you're an intrusion. Because even I, as a UNLV faculty member, sometimes I go to concerts and I wonder if I should be there or belong there. And so, I mean, think about how that must feel for someone who's not even a musician. And so I think we really need to think about the hospitality aspect of the concert experience if we want people to come. If we want to put, butts in seats, we need to make people feel like they're welcome and it's not some like intimidating thing. And, you go to a classical music concert and there are all these unwritten rules, like you can't make any noise. And yeah, as a performer, like, noise is distracting, but that's one of the things that comes with the territory of performing for a live audience. Um, and so, I mean, obviously, like, silence your phone, but, if you need to like wiggle a little bit, I will forgive you. And I'm just, I'm thankful when there's a large audience there, because I really think that it provides a lot of energy for the performers. Um, and so I think in this world that we have now, that's remote and virtual, and like always on a screen, I think we need to emphasize connecting to our audiences more than ever. And as Jen said, the reception is a really great way to meet people, and it's a great way for the audience to see us as human beings and really be able to connect to us. Um, and I mean, what better thing than food and drink to bring people together?
We have such an amazing resource on campus, the Harris College of Hospitality here at UNLV. I mean, how amazing would it be if we were able to actually, get together with students or faculty and then design an entire experience that would pair, drinks and food with specific new music pieces that are being presented. Um,
A+ idea right there.
Yeah, and I think even on the general level of just, working with the hospitality school on how to make any concert experience more welcoming, you know, because I'm sure, they think a lot about that, when you walk into a hotel or when you walk into a restaurant. I mean, everything has been considered, the lighting, the decor, the chairs that are out. And I don't think that we musicians think about that enough. And I know some like administrator is probably watching this and being like, there's no money. But I mean, let's be honest, like restaurant profit margins are also extremely slim, but they make it a priority. And I think, if we want to continue to have audiences for classical music, we need to make welcoming them a priority for us.
And so, since we've been talking so much about food, and I don't know about you, but I'm getting a little hungry right now, but it'd be really amazing to brainstorm some pairings. So, Katie, speaking of ideas for pairing desserts with music, we have a question from Jennifer Grimm, all the way from the Frost School of Music in Miami. This is her question. Katie and I were supposed to play a series of recitals of French music in spring 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. I'd love to ask her to come up with a tasting menu of desserts to accompany our canceled recital program, which consisted of Debussy, Prelude to an Afternoon of the Faun, Ravel, Sonatine, Messiaen, Le Merle Noir, and Boulez Sonatine. What desserts would you pair with each piece and why?
Okay, disclaimer, I've never made any of these desserts. One day, maybe. So the Debussy, thinking about the poem it's based on, I think I would make a puits d'amour, which is, it translates to a well of love. And so it's a pâte à choux pastry filled with pastry cream. And so at one point in history, it had erotic connotations, which is why I chose it to go with this piece. For Ravel, Ravel was actually from the Basque region of France, so I thought I would make a gâteau basque, which has a flaky crust surrounding pastry cream or jam. And then for the Messiaen, which is the title of that piece translates to the black bird, and it's one of his many bird pieces. So I thought maybe an île flottante with a bird's nest of spun sugar on top would be appropriate. And then for the boulez, I chose a souffle. And I chose the souffle because it can be very temperamental. And if you screw up, there's no going back. Just like when you play the sonatine.
Agree. This isn't fair. Like, you just described all these amazing desserts, and I have no way to try them.
Well, maybe one day when I quit my job.
All right, so Katie, before we move back to the kitchen, I wanted to let you know that a few more of your fans submitted some questions. So the first question comes from student composer Casey Davis, And his question is this: do you have a favorite TV show, movie, or book?
Well, I haven't watched the movie in like a couple of months. um, I do read a lot of books though. Oh, and breaking news, I reached my reading goal for the year, which was 26 books. Thanks, COVID.
Yay!
What was book 26?
Book 26 was actually called In Defense of Food by Michael Pollan.
So you have a favorite book?
I don't know if I have a favorite book. I think some books I can recommend to people. Let's see. In nonfiction, I would recommend Quiet by Susan Cain, which is the book about introverts and introversion, which actually multiple people have tried to recommend to me in the past year. And I just want everyone to know that like every classic introvert read that book 5 years ago. Another one I would recommend is called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And it talks about all the different biases we can have in thinking, which is really important. He won a Nobel Prize along with Amos Tversky on their work in decision making and behavioral economics. But I think this book is really accessible for everyone and really makes you think about all, the opinions you have or the decisions you make. Another important one, I think we've talked about this, is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. It's about the importance of sleep, especially for all you students watching this. The all-nighter is not working.
It never does. And they keep doing it.
Exactly.
So, Katie, we have a couple more questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So, this next question is an audio question submitted by Phil Joy, and I will play it right now.
Hi, Katie. My question is, does your pound cake consistently show a nice crack that we're all looking for?
Well, Phil, we will see when it comes out of the oven, won't we? But I find that with the fruit on top, you don't always get that characteristic crack. But if you did it without the fruit, you would.
Right. This isn't a normal pound cake, right?
Yeah, it's finessed.
And so, how is it finessed?
So a traditional pound cake recipe, you have butter and you beat the sugar into the butter, and that creates air pockets. And then you add the eggs and the salt and the flour. But in this pound cake recipe, we beat the egg whites and the egg yolks separately. And we also added a smidge of baking powder to help with the rise. So this pound cake shouldn't be as dense as a traditional pound cake.
So, are you aiming for a pretty good rise then with that baking powder?
There's just a little bit of baking powder in there, but in combination with the egg whites and the sugar that's been creamed into the butter, we should get some nice height.
And our last question is a video question. And it was submitted by my composition student, Josiah Sitzma.
Hey, Katie. Can't wait to see what you guys are baking in the kitchen today. Anyways, I was wondering if you could go back in time to when you were, say, 21 and give yourself one piece of advice. What would it be?
Who says I'm not 21 right now?
Yeah. How rude. Jeez.
I think I would tell myself to explore other art forms more outside of music, like dance and visual art and architecture and theater. I've been exploring that more lately, but I wish I had started a lot sooner. And I think the other thing for me is, so most people know this, but in undergrad I was a double major in flute and piano. But that meant that I spent an average of 8 hours a day in a practice room, 7 days a week. And so knowing what I know now, I think I would probably not spend so much time in the practice room. And I'm not saying to any students out there who are watching this that you should practice less, but I think for myself, I'm not sure I really needed like all 8 hours every single day, and I'm not sure it got me any farther, than fewer hours would have gotten me. And I mean, I did end up quitting the flute anyway after I finished my degree, so I suppose I could have just like stopped practicing at some point, but work ethic.
Why did you decide to quit the flute?
I decided that the orchestral route was not for me, and what I really wanted to do was play chamber music. And sorry, woodwind players, but the wind repertoire for chamber music is, it doesn't have quite the same depth and range as the piano chamber repertoire. So that's why I quit the flute.
So, Katie, I've been staring at your t-shirt this entire time, and sorry, that might sound weird because it shows I'm like staring at your chest, but you have a gigantic double scoop ice cream. Can you just talk a little bit more about your t-shirt and what it says?
My t-shirt says, "I like chocolate ice cream," which is
A fact it may be, but those scoops are vanilla for sure.
You know what? This was a budget print, okay?
All right, fine, fair.
Your imagination.
It's a nice t-shirt. I like it.
Thank you. Do we go back to the kitchen?
Yeah.
It's kitchen time.
Here it is, right out of the oven.
Oh my gosh.
Ooh.
That looks so good. I wish I could smell it.
I wish I could taste it.
Well, I guess you'll just have to make your own.
Katie, thank you so much again for joining us. We cannot wait to make our own pound cake with finesse. Or we will just invite you over and you'll make it for us. To those of you watching, thank you for joining us for the Nextet podcast episode, Keys to the Kitchen with Katie Leung. This is Jennifer Beller, the artistic director of Nextet, and stay tuned for our next podcast episode. This episode has been sponsored by